And that you mentioned paying lip service to some of the shortcomings. Sometimes I think it's easier for athletes at the really stratospheric high level to beat themselves up. But how do you stay also mindful of the things you did right?
Yeah, I think it's just another skill. It's another skill you need in your skill set. I mean, sport is physical, but it's also mental, extremely mental. So there's a huge mental component to, I think, everything in life, to be honest. I mean, I'm a great believer in that the mind rules the body. So, I try and be positive about the things I've done well, but I think, like you mentioned, athletes in that stratospheric or great champions, they're able to assess their performance honestly. And really it comes down to not just racing your competition, but also racing yourself. Oftentimes in sport, the largest or the highest hurdle or obstacle you'll face is your own fears and your own doubts. And you certainly need to address that in an honest fashion. And I've always felt that it's not the result that's so important to me. Obviously, I've been blessed throughout my career and been fortunate to win a lot of big races. But you get to a point where you realise it's more about the performance. Where you finish, where you get ranked at the end of the day is obviously how you make your income and how other people perceive you, but how I perceive my own performance is just that. I just look at the performance itself and how it stacks up to what I had planned and what I had visualised. And for me, that's where a lot of the pride and satisfaction comes from, and also a lot of the self-analysis. It's my performance is what's most important, and executing what I think my potential should lead to. And that's the way I analyse a lot of things. I mean, obviously you're in a race, so it's a tactical battle as well, and there's a lot of to and fro with you and your fellow athletes, and that's a big part of racing. But essentially, it's my performance that I really analyse, and the way I grade myself really is just living up to my own expectations and a fulfilment of my own potential. That's what I'm most concerned with.
Kona, the Hawaii Ironman is like a long, you think about an 8-hour stretch of time, and if you compare that to the typical person's, basically the whole workday, and to follow the mind in all the places it goes, do you find your mind wandering sometimes, and you have to remind yourself to get back on track in that particularly long event?
It's interesting, and I think you need to let it wander. I think it's a skill, and I think that alludes back to the question you asked earlier about training alone. Obviously, you need to be cognitive of the things that are going to enhance your performance, like fueling, hydration, how the race is playing out, how you're executing your strategy. But at the same time, it's a long time, and you don't want to be clock watching. And I think that's the skill that you need to develop, is to be aware of the things you need to be aware of, while at the same time just drifting off. So it becomes a subconscious thing, and I think that is a skill in this race. I've been able to develop it quite quickly, where I am certainly aware of the things I need to be aware of, but at the same time my mind does wander a little bit, but not to the point where it's distracting, to the point where I think it's advantageous to my performance and the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. But yeah, it's an interesting point, because I mean, even when I stepped up in distance, I was daunted by the individual distances of each discipline and the length of time I was going to be racing for. But the training prepares you physically, and it does mentally for that, and it just becomes part and parcel of the race. And it's certainly a skill, a mental skill you need to learn, I think, to be effective in this race.
What's the volume of pain that you have to accept to excel at something so difficult?
I think it's a lot. It's like any endurance sport, and any contact sport for that matter as well. They say you have to pay the price, and I think you do physically, particularly in the lead up, the long months leading up, and in the race itself. You have to be prepared to go very deep. And that's the beauty of that race for me, is that, as I mentioned earlier, it really is a race against yourself and your own limits. But it can be painful. I mean, they say nothing that's ever worthwhile is easy, so that's part of the challenge for me. The challenge is to go above and beyond the limits that other people set for me, but more importantly, the limits that I set for myself. I want to match and meet those limits and then exceed them. And it can be painful. I mean, you're an endurance athlete, you know what that's all about. But once again, that's the mental aspect coming into it as well, and you train your mind to cope with that and to deal with it, and you learn strategies to overcome it.